When Saren Hale traded herself for a bag of flour and a doctor's visit, she thought she understood the price of survival. But the man waiting at the altar wasn't just crippled. He was ruined. Rowan Vance had been Montana's most feared rancher before the mountain broke his legs and his will to live. Now he spent his days drowning in whiskey and rage, cursing anyone stupid enough to care. Their marriage contract promised food and shelter. It did not promise kindness, hope, or anything resembling love. Some deals save your family. Others just bury you slower. This is the story of two people who refused to stay buried. If you want to see how two strangers survived the coldest winter of their lives, stay until the end, and hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The rabbit hung limp in Saren's hand, its body already stiff with cold. 3 days of hunting in the high country, and this was all she had to show for it. One scrawny cottontail that wouldn't feed her family for more than a single meal. She stood at the edge of the tree line, staring down at the valley below, where smoke rose thin and gray from her cabin's chimney. Even from this distance, she could see how the structure leaned to one side, the roof sagging under the weight of last week's snow. Her fingers were numb inside her worn gloves. Her boots, packed with newspaper to cover the holes, had soaked through hours ago. 22 years old, and she felt ancient, every joint aching, every breath sharp in her lungs. The wind picked up, and Saren turned her back to it, starting the long descent. The sun was already sinking behind the peaks, painting the snow a deep orange that would have been beautiful if she had the luxury of noticing. She didn't. Beautiful didn't fill stomachs or pay for medicine. By the time she reached the cabin, full dark had fallen. She pushed through the door and was hit immediately by the smell. Sweat, sickness, and the sour tang of unwashed bodies living too close together in too small a space. The fire had burned down to embers. Her mother lay on the bed in the corner, her breathing shallow and rattling. 10-year-old Micah sat beside her, his eyes too large in his thin face. "Did you get something?" he asked. Saren held up the rabbit. "Not much. It's something." She hung her coat on the nail by the door and moved to the fireplace, feeding it the last of their split wood. The flames caught slowly, reluctant. While the fire built, she skinned and gutted the rabbit with quick, efficient movements, her hands working on memory while her mind cataloged everything wrong. Her mother's fever hadn't broken. Micah's cough was getting worse. They were out of wood, out of flour, down to the last of the dried beans that had more weevils than nutrition. "Mama asked for water," Micah said quietly. Saren glanced at the bucket by the door. Empty. Of course it was empty. She'd have to break ice at the creek, and she'd already been out in the cold for 12 hours. She set the rabbit aside and grabbed the bucket. "I can do it," Micah offered, starting to stand. "Sit down." "I'm not useless." "I didn't say you were. Sit down. Sit." He sat, but his jaw was tight. That stubborn Hale pride. It ran through all of them like a crack through ice, waiting to split them open at the worst possible moment. Their father had died with that same pride 2 winters ago, refusing to ask for help until it was too late, until the illness in his lungs had turned him gray and gasping. The creek was 100 yards behind the cabin, frozen solid, except for one spot where the current ran fast enough to keep a small pool clear. Saren knelt on the bank, broke through the thin new ice with the bucket's edge, and dipped it into the black water below. Her reflection stared back at her for just a moment. Hollow cheeks, tangled dark hair, eyes that had forgotten how to expect anything good. She hauled the bucket back inside and set it on the table. Her mother stirred at the sound, her eyes opening to narrow slits. "Saren? I'm here, Mama. You're freezing." "I'm fine." Her mother's hand emerged from under the blankets, reaching out. Saren took it. The skin was hot and papery. "You got something?" "A rabbit. I'll make stew." "That's good. That's real good." Her mother's eyes drifted closed again. "You're a good girl, Saren. You take care of things. Save your strength." But her mother was already asleep again, her breathing labored. Saren stood there a moment longer, holding that hot, fragile hand, before gently laying it back on the bed. She made the stew. It was more water than meat, more hope than substance, but it was something. She gave Micah the largest portion and her mother the broth, keeping barely anything for herself. Afterwards, she sat by the fire and stared into the flames, doing the math in her head over and over, trying to make the numbers work out differently. They never did. We're going to starve, Micah said quietly from his spot on the floor. No, we're not. Mama's dying. She's sick. That's different. Papa was just sick too, and then he died. Saren turned to look at him. You want to give up? You want to just lie down and wait for it? I didn't say that. Then stop talking like it's already over. He looked down at his hands. I'm scared. The honesty of it hit her harder than any accusation could have. She wanted to tell him there was nothing to be scared of, that everything would be fine, that she had a plan. But she'd never lied to Micah before, and she wasn't about to start now. Yeah, she said. Me too. That night, Saren lay awake on her bedroll near the fire, listening to her mother's ragged breathing and Micah's occasional cough. The wind howled outside, rattling the loose boards of the cabin walls. Somewhere in the valley below, there were families with full larders, warm houses, children who didn't know what hunger felt like. Somewhere there were people who had margin for error, room for bad luck, the luxury of hope. She was not one of those people. Sleep finally took her sometime near dawn, but it didn't last. The sound of hoofbeats woke her. Several horses approaching fast. Saren was on her feet before she was fully conscious, her father's old hunting knife in her hand. Micah sat up, his eyes wide. Stay with Mama, Saren ordered, moving to the window. 3 riders came into view through the warped glass. 2 men and a woman, all of them well-dressed in heavy coats and good boots. The woman rode in front, sitting tall in her saddle despite the gray in her hair. Even from inside the cabin, Saren could tell this was someone used to being obeyed. They stopped outside. The woman dismounted with the ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime on horseback. She looked at the cabin with an expression Saren couldn't quite read. Assessment, perhaps, or judgment. Then she walked straight to the door and knocked. Saren opened it with the knife still in her hand. The woman's eyes flicked to the blade, then back to Saren's face. Miss Hale? Who's asking? My name is Eleanor Vance. I own the ranch 10 miles south of here. May I come in? Saren had heard of the Vance Ranch. Everyone in the territory had. It was one of the largest operations in Montana, thousands of acres and hundreds of head of cattle. Eleanor Vance was rumored to be hard as the mountains themselves, a woman who'd held her land through drought, harsh winters, and more than one range war. What do you want? Saren asked. To talk. It's cold out here, and what I have to say requires privacy. Every instinct told Saren to refuse, to slam the door and bar it. But Eleanor Vance wasn't the kind of woman who showed up at a failing cabin in the middle of winter without a purpose, and Saren was desperate enough to hear her out. She stepped aside. Eleanor entered, followed by her 2 men, who positioned themselves by the door. Their hands stayed near their gun belts, but they didn't draw. Eleanor looked around the cabin, taking in the sick woman on the bed, the thin boy trying to look brave, the bare shelves, the dying fire. Your mother has pneumonia, Eleanor said. It wasn't a question. She's recovering. She's dying. I can hear it in her lungs from here. Eleanor turned to face Saren. How much food do you have left? That's my business. Less than a week, I'd guess. Probably less. And you're out of money, out of credit at every store in the valley, and too proud to beg. Eleanor's eyes were sharp and cold. So let me be direct. You have 2 choices. You can stay here and watch your family die slowly, or you can accept my offer. What offer? Marriage. To my nephew. The words hung in the air like smoke. Saren stared at her. You're joking. I never joke about business. Rowan is 28 years old. He was thrown from his horse 3 years ago and broke both legs badly. He walks now, but with difficulty and constant pain. He's also become a drunk and a bastard who drives away anyone who tries to help him. Eleanor's expression didn't change. I need someone strong enough to manage him. In exchange, your mother will have the best doctor in the territory. Your brother will have food and a roof and schooling, and you will have a home at the Vance Ranch for as long as the marriage lasts. You're buying me. I'm offering you survival. There's a difference. Saren's grip tightened on the knife. And what does your nephew think about this arrangement? Rowan will do as he's told or he'll be cut off completely. He knows that. Eleanor stepped closer. I don't need you to love him. I don't even need you to like him. I need you to be strong enough not to run when he tries to break you. Most women can't handle him anymore. You've survived out here alone for 2 winters. I think you can. Get out, Look at your mother. Really look at her. She has a week at most, probably less. Your brother won't last much longer after that, not on what you can provide. Eleanor's voice was brutal in its honesty. You can hate me for saying it, but that doesn't make it less true. This is the only lifeline you're going to get. Saren wanted to throw her out, wanted to spit in her face and tell her that the Hales didn't sell themselves, that they survived on their own terms. But her mother's rattling breath filled the silence, and Micah was watching her with those two old eyes, and the knife in her hand suddenly felt like the only weapon she had against a war she was losing. How long do I have to decide? Sareen asked. Until I walk out that door. After that, the offer is gone. That's not enough time. It's more than your mother has. Saren turned to look at Micah. He was staring at her, scared and confused and trying so hard to be brave. Then she looked at her mother, that hot, labored breathing that rattled in her chest like dice in a cup. She thought about her father, who died proud and alone and cold. She thought about all the hunts that came up empty, all the prayers that went unanswered, all the months of watching her family slip away piece by piece while she worked herself to exhaustion, trying to hold them together. Pride was a luxury. Survival was not. Fine, Saren said. I'll do it. Eleanor nodded once, as if she'd expected nothing less. The doctor will be here before nightfall. The wedding is in 3 days. You'll move to the ranch immediately after. Bring nothing. Everything you need will be provided. I want to see him first. Your nephew. You'll see him at the wedding. No, I want to see him before I agree to marry him. Eleanor studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded. Tomorrow. I'll send a wagon at first light. She left without another word, her men following behind. The door closed and the cabin felt even smaller and colder than before. Sareen stood frozen, the knife still in her hand, her heart hammering against her ribs. What did you just do? Micah whispered. I don't know, Saren said honestly. I really don't know. The doctor arrived that evening, a stern-faced man with a bag full of medicines and a no-nonsense attitude. He examined Sareen's mother, listened to her lungs, and administered something that made her breathing ease almost immediately. Then he left bottles of medicine with strict instructions and a promise to return in 2 days. Saren sat beside her mother's bed that night, watching the color slowly return to her face. Micah fell asleep finally, his cough quieter than it had been in weeks. The cabin was warmer. The doctor had paid one of his men to bring firewood, stacking it outside until it reached the window. You made a deal, her mother whispered suddenly. Saren startled. You were asleep. I heard enough. Her mother's eyes were clear now, the fever breaking. What did you promise? Nothing that matters. Don't lie to me, Saren. So Saren told her. The whole thing, from Eleanor's offer to her own desperate acceptance. Her mother listened without interrupting, her face unreadable in the firelight. When Saren finished, her mother was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Your father would hate this. Papa's dead. Because he was too proud to ask for help when he needed it. Because he thought starving was better than owing anyone anything. Her mother's hand found Saren's. Don't be like him. Don't die for pride. This isn't about pride. It's about selling myself to save you. Then it's about love. And love is the only thing worth selling yourself for. Saren looked away. He's crippled and mean. Eleanor said he drives everyone away. Sounds lonely. Sounds awful. Maybe. Her mother's grip tightened. Or maybe you'll be good for each other. Two people who know what rock bottom looks like. You're supposed to tell me not to do this. I'm supposed to be dead in a week. Plans change. Her mother pulled her closer. Listen to me. You're strong, Saren. Stronger than your father, stronger than me. Whatever that man is, whatever he's become, you'll survive him. And maybe you'll help him survive himself. I don't want to help him. I want to keep you and Micah alive. Then do both. You've never done anything halfway in your life. Don't start now. The wagon arrived at dawn, just as Eleanor had promised. Saren climbed into it wearing her cleanest dress, which wasn't saying much, and her father's old coat. Micah stood in the doorway watching her go, trying to look brave and failing. Her mother was still too weak to stand. The driver was one of the men who'd accompanied Eleanor the day before. He didn't speak during the ride, just guided the horses down the valley road toward the Vance Ranch. The land changed as they traveled, the scrub and rocks giving way to fenced pastures and well-maintained fencing. The ranch house itself was massive, 2 stories of solid timber with a wide porch and smoke rising from 3 different chimneys. They didn't go to the main house. Instead, the driver took her around back to a smaller building, a bunkhouse maybe, or guest quarters. He tied off the horses and gestured for her to follow. "He's inside," the driver said. "Good luck." He walked away before Saren could ask what that meant. She stood outside the door for a full minute, her heart pounding. Then she knocked. "Go away." The voice was rough, slurred, drunk. Saren opened the door anyway. The room was dark despite the late morning sun, all the curtains drawn. It smelled like whiskey, sweat, and anger. A man sat in a chair by the cold fireplace, a bottle in one hand and a revolver on the table beside him. He didn't look up when she entered. "I said go away." "Eleanor Vance sent me," Saren said. "Then Eleanor can go to hell. Take yourself with her." She moved closer, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. Rowan Vance looked nothing like she'd imagined. He was big, broad shoulders, strong arms, the build of someone who'd spent his life working cattle. But everything else about him spoke of defeat. His hair was too long and unwashed. His beard was unkempt. His eyes, when he finally looked up, were bloodshot and full of something that looked like hate. "You're the girl," he said flatly, "the one stupid enough to agree to this. And you're the man too drunk to stand up for his own wedding." His laugh was bitter. "Is that what Eleanor told you, that I can't stand?" She's got a sick sense of humor. He shoved himself up from the chair, and Saren saw the canes leaning against the armrest. He grabbed them and hauled himself upright with visible effort, his face going tight with pain. When he was standing, he was tall, taller than she'd expected, but he swayed slightly, and she couldn't tell if it was from the injury or the alcohol. "There. Happy? I can stand. I can even walk if you're patient." He took 2 lurching steps forward. "What I can't do is work cattle anymore. Can't ride for more than an hour without wanting to blow my own head off. Can't sleep through the night without my legs screaming. But sure, let's pretend I'm a real man worth marrying." "I didn't come here for pity," Saren said. "Good, I'm fresh out. I came to see if this was worth it, if trading my freedom for my family's survival made any sense at all." She looked him over, the ruined man, the anger, the waste. "I still don't know." "Then leave. I didn't ask for this. I sure as hell don't need another person here to watch me fail." "Your aunt seems to think you need somebody." "My aunt can rot." Saren moved to the window and yanked open the curtains. Sunlight flooded the room, and Rowan flinched back like she'd struck him. She turned to face him, really seeing him now in the light. Under the filth and the rage, there was something else. Exhaustion. Bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion. "Let me be clear," Saren said. "I'm not here because I want to be. I'm here because my mother is dying and my little brother is starving and I'm out of options. This marriage is a business deal. You need someone Eleanor approves of. I need food and medicine. That's all this is." "Fine. I'm not going to fall in love with you. I'm not going to fix you. I'm not going to make you want to live again or any of that nonsense. I'm going to keep your aunt from cutting you off, and you're going to stay out of my way. Understand?" He stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. Sharp and genuine. "You're tougher than the last 3, I'll give you that." "The last 3? Women Eleanor tried to shove at me, all of them sweet and gentle and desperate to help." His smile was cruel. "I broke them all, made them cry, made them quit. What makes you think you'll last?" "I don't break easy. Everyone breaks eventually. Then I guess we'll see." Rowan studied her with those bloodshot eyes, and for just a moment something shifted in his expression. Curiosity, maybe, or the ghost of respect. Then it was gone, replaced by that familiar bitter hatred. "The wedding's in 3 days," he said. "After that you'll move into the main house. We won't share a bed. We barely have to speak. Eleanor gets her way, you get your family taken care of, and I get left the hell alone. That's the deal." "Fine. Fine." Saren turned and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the handle. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry about what happened to you. Save it. I don't need your pity either." It wasn't pity. It was just a fact. She left before he could respond. stepping out into the cold sunlight. The driver was waiting with the wagon. She climbed in without looking back at the dark building behind her. On the ride home, she tried to process what she'd just seen. That broken, angry man who couldn't even keep his curtains open. That would be her husband. That would be her life, at least on paper. She'd tied herself to a sinking ship to save the people she loved, and now she had to figure out how to keep from drowning. Her mother was sitting up when Siren got home, looking better than she had in weeks. Micah had color in his cheeks. There was food on the table, actual food delivered that morning by another one of Eleanor's men. Bread, cheese, dried meat, beans, flour, more than they'd had in months. "Well?" her mother asked. Siren sat down heavily in the chair by the fire. "The wedding is in 3 days." "What's he like?" She thought about Rowan Vance, drunk and furious in his dark room. She thought about the way he'd looked at her, like she was just another person come to witness his failure. She thought about the exhaustion in his eyes, the kind that came from fighting a losing battle for so long you forgot why you started. "He's a mess," Siren said finally. A complete disaster. "Can you handle him?" "I don't have a choice." Her mother nodded slowly. "Then you will." The wedding took place in the study of the Vance ranch house, with only Eleanor, a judge, and 2 witnesses present. Siren wore a simple dress Eleanor had provided, nothing fancy, just clean and well-made. Rowan wore a suit that hung slightly loose on him, like it had been made for a different man in a better time. He leaned heavily on a cane during the ceremony. His face was blank, his eyes distant. When the judge asked if he took Siren to be his wife, Rowan said, "I do," like he was agreeing to his own execution. When it was Siren's turn, she looked at Eleanor instead of Rowan. The older woman's expression was unreadable. Satisfied, maybe. Or just tired. "I do," Siren said. The judge pronounced them married. No one kissed. No one cheered. Eleanor signed the certificate, paid the judge, and dismissed him immediately. Then she turned to Siren. "Your mother and brother will be moved to the south cottage tomorrow. It's warmer and closer to the main house. The doctor will check on them weekly." She handed Siren a key. "You'll have the east wing. Rowan has the west. Stay out of each other's way unless absolutely necessary." "Understood." Eleanor looked between them, the drunk, broken man and the desperate, hollow-eyed girl. And for just a moment, something like pity crossed her face. But it was gone quickly, replaced by that familiar hardness. "Try not to kill each other," she said, and left. Siren and Rowan stood in the study alone. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the mountains gold and red. Inside, the silence stretched long and uncomfortable. "Welcome to hell," Rowan said finally. He turned and limped out of the room without another word. Siren stood there alone, a married woman now, bound by law and desperation to a man who hated his own life. She looked down at her hand, at the simple ring Eleanor had provided. It felt heavy. It felt like a shackle. But her mother would live. Micah would have food. They'd survive the winter. That was worth something. It had to be. She walked to the window and looked out at the ranch. The vast pastures, the distant cattle, the mountains rising dark against the sky. Somewhere out there was the life she might have had if things had been different. But things weren't different. They were exactly as brutal and unfair as they'd always been. And Siren Vance now, would survive them anyway. She always had. The east wing smelled like lavender and beeswax, clean in a way that made Siren's skin itch. She stood in the doorway of what was now supposedly her bedroom, staring at the 4-poster bed with its thick quilts, the polished dresser, the washstand with an actual porcelain basin. A fire burned in the fireplace. Her pack, the single canvas bag containing everything she owned, sat on the floor looking pathetic and small. She didn't unpack. Instead, she walked to the window and looked out at the south cottage, where her mother and Micah would be living come morning. The building was dark now, empty, waiting. In her old cabin, her mother would be sleeping with that awful rattle in her chest, and Micah would be curled up trying to stay warm. Here, there was heat and medicine and safety. The price had been herself. Siren turned away from the window and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was soft. Too soft. She lay back anyway, staring at the ceiling, and waited for exhaustion to take her under. It didn't come. She spent the night half awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch house settling around her, wondering what the hell she'd just done. Morning came gray and cold. Saren dressed in her own clothes. She wasn't ready to wear anything Eleanor provided yet, and made her way downstairs. The house was massive, easy to get lost in, but she followed the smell of coffee and found the kitchen. A woman stood at the stove, middle-aged and round-faced, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked up when Saren entered and smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You must be the new Mrs. Vance. I'm Clara. I cook and manage the house." "Just Saren is fine. Mrs. Vance is what Miss Eleanor expects." Clara poured coffee into a thick mug and set it on the table. "Sit. I'll make you breakfast." "I can make my own." "I'm sure you can, but it's my job, so let me do it." Saren sat, too tired to argue. The coffee was strong and hot, better than anything she'd had in years. She drank it black and watched Clara work, moving around the kitchen with the ease of someone who'd been doing this for decades. "Mr. Rowan won't be down," Clara said without looking at her. "He takes his meals in his room usually, when he bothers to eat at all." "Does he come out at all?" "Not much anymore. Used to, right after the accident. He'd force himself to the dinner table, try to work with the hands. But it hurt too much, and nobody knew how to handle him. So he gave up." Clara set a plate in front of Saren, eggs, bacon, toast, more food than she'd normally eat in 2 days. "Miss Eleanor thinks you might get him to stop hiding. Miss Eleanor is paying me to exist, not to fix him. She's paying you to be his wife. That means something, even in a deal like this." Serene ate in silence. The food was good, but it sat heavy in her stomach. When she finished, she carried her plate to the sink, ignoring Clara's protest, and washed it herself. Then she walked out the back door into the cold morning air. The ranch yard was already busy. Men moved between the barns and corrals, tending to horses and cattle. They glanced at her as she passed, curious but not hostile. One of them, an older man with a grizzled beard, nodded to her. "Morning, ma'am." "Morning." She kept walking until she reached the south cottage. Her mother and Micah hadn't arrived yet. Eleanor's men were still loading their few belongings into a wagon back at the cabin. Saren unlocked the door and stepped inside. The cottage was clean and warm, 2 bedrooms and a main room with a fireplace already stacked with wood. There were curtains on the windows, rugs on the floors, furniture that didn't wobble. It was more than her family had ever had. She stood in the middle of the main room and felt nothing. Not relief, not gratitude. Just a hollow space where something should have been. The door opened behind her. Saren turned, expecting one of Eleanor's men, but it was Rowan. He stood in the doorway, leaning on his cane, his face haggard, but less drunk than yesterday. He looked around the cottage with an expression she couldn't read. "She set them up nice," he said. "Better than nice. That's Eleanor. When she buys something, she takes care of it." He looked at Saren. "You included." "I'm not something she bought." "Yes, you are. We both are. Difference is, I've known it longer." He turned to leave, but Saren spoke before he could. "Why do you let her control you?" Rowan stopped. "Because the alternative is starving in some flophouse in town, drowning in my own piss and misery. At least here I have a roof and whiskey." He glanced back at her. "Why do you let her control you?" "Because my family was dying." "Right. So we're both here because we didn't have a choice. Stop pretending this is anything else." He limped away before she could respond. Saren watched him go, that slow, painful gait that made every step look like a battle. She wondered how many times a day he had to make that walk, how many times the pain spiked through him, how many times he thought about just giving up and staying in bed. Then she wondered why she cared. Her mother and Micah arrived an hour later. The transformation in her mother's face when she saw the cottage was almost painful to watch. Shock, then relief, then something that looked like grief for all the years they'd spent without this kind of safety. Micah ran through the rooms like a kid again, his eyes wide, his cough almost gone. "Saren," her mother said quietly, "this is too much." "It's what we needed." "I know, She stopped, tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry you had to trade yourself for it." "I'm not." The lie came easy. "I'm fine, Mama. You're safe. That's all that matters." Her mother didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. Instead, she pulled Saren into a hug, holding on tight. Saren stood stiff in her arms, unable to return it, unable to feel anything but that same hollow emptiness. When she finally pulled away, Micah was watching from the doorway of his new bedroom. Do you have to go back to the big house? Yeah, I live there now. Can we visit you? I don't know. I'll ask. She left before they could see her face crack. Walking back to the main house felt like walking to a cell, even though the ranch was beautiful and the house was warm. It wasn't hers. None of this was hers. She was just a piece in Eleanor's game, moved around the board to keep another piece from falling off entirely. That night, Saren sat alone in the dining room while Clara served dinner. The table was enormous, made for 12 people, and Saren sat at one end feeling ridiculous. Rowan didn't appear. She asked Clara where he was. In his room, like always. Does he eat at all? Sometimes, mostly drinks. Saren looked down at the roast beef and potatoes on her plate. Then she stood up, grabbed the plate, and walked out of the dining room. Mrs. Vance? Clara started. I'll bring it back. She climbed the stairs to the west wing, following the sound of glass clinking against glass. Rowan's door was closed. She knocked once, hard. Go away. Saren opened the door anyway. He was sitting by the window this time, a bottle on the floor beside him, his cane leaning against the chair. He looked over at her with bleary eyes. I said go away. I heard you. She walked in and set the plate on the table beside him. Eat something. Not hungry. Don't care. Eat anyway. He stared at the food, then at her. What the hell are you doing? Making sure you don't drink yourself to death in the first week. Eleanor would blame me. So this is about Eleanor. This is about you wasting away in here like a coward. The words hung in the air like a slap. Rowan's face darkened. Get out. No. I said get out. And I said no. You want me gone, you're going to have to throw me out yourself. Think you can manage that? He lunged up from the chair, rage twisting his face, but his legs buckled and he nearly fell. Saren moved without thinking, catching him by the arm and steadying him. He tried to shove her away, but she held on, and for a moment they stood there locked together, his fury meeting her stubborn refusal to back down. Let go of me, he said through gritted teeth. Sit down first. I don't need your help. You just almost face-planted into the floor. Sit down. He jerked away from her and collapsed back into the chair, breathing hard, his face pale with pain and humiliation. Saren stood over him, her heart pounding, her hands shaking slightly. She shoved them into her pockets so he wouldn't see. Eat the food, she said, or throw it at me. I don't care, but I'm not leaving until you do one or the other. Rowan glared at her. Then he picked up the plate and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, food and ceramic exploding everywhere. There. Happy? Thrilled. She turned and walked out, closing the door behind her. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and took a long breath, trying to steady herself. Her hands were still shaking. From anger or fear, she couldn't tell. Clara was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. I heard the crash. He's not hungry. He never is. Clara looked at her carefully. Most women don't go back after the first time he throws something. I'm not most women. No, I'm starting to see that. The next morning, Saren was up before dawn. She dressed and headed out to the barns, ignoring the cold. If she was stuck here, she might as well make herself useful. The ranch hands looked surprised to see her, but the grizzled man from yesterday, his name was Tom, handed her a pitchfork without comment. You know how to muck stalls? I can figure it out. Good enough. She worked through the morning, mucking stalls and hauling hay, her muscles protesting but her mind finally quiet. It felt good to work, to do something that had a clear purpose and a visible result. By midday, her back was screaming and her hands were blistered, but the stalls were clean. Tom found her sitting on a hay bale, catching her breath. You're tougher than you look. I've had practice. Rowan used to work these same stalls. Before. Tom looked toward the house. He was the best hand we had. Could break a horse gentler than anyone I've seen. Then the accident happened and he just stopped. Stopped working? Stopped everything. Stopped caring. It's like he died that day and just forgot to fall down. Saren followed his gaze to the house. How bad was it, the accident? Bad as it gets without killing you outright. Horse threw him on a ridge and he fell maybe 30 feet onto rocks. Broke both legs in multiple places, shattered his hip, cracked ribs. Doc said he'd never walk again. Rowan proved him wrong on that, but the pain never stopped. Every step is agony. He just hides it better some days than others. And the drinking? Started about a year after, when he realized the pain wasn't going away, that he'd never be the same. Tom shook his head. Miss Eleanor tried everything, different doctors, specialists from back east, even some quack with magnets. Nothing worked, so she brought in women, thinking maybe that would help. All of them left within weeks. What happened to them? He drove them off. Said awful things, broke furniture, made it clear they weren't wanted. Eleanor kept trying anyway. Then she found you. Lucky me. Tom smiled slightly. Maybe, or maybe you're exactly what he needs, someone who won't run. Saren didn't respond. She stood and picked up the pitchfork again. What else needs doing? She worked until evening, until her whole body ached and her mind was blessedly empty. When she finally trudged back to the house, Clara met her at the door with a stern look. You need a bath. You smell like the barn. I worked in the barn. Upstairs, there's a tub in your room. I'll bring hot water. Saren wanted to argue, but the thought of hot water was too tempting. She climbed the stairs and found Clara had already filled the tub halfway. By the time the older woman brought up the rest, steam was rising from the surface. Thank you, Saren said. It's my job. Clara paused at the door. You're different from the others. So I keep hearing. I mean it as a compliment. The others were here to save him. You're just trying to survive. That might actually work. She left before Saren could ask what she meant. Saren stripped off her filthy clothes and sank into the hot water, feeling her muscles slowly unknot. She stayed until the water went lukewarm, trying not to think about anything at all. That night at dinner, she didn't bother going to the dining room. Instead, she made a plate in the kitchen and carried it upstairs to Rowan's door. She knocked once. Leave it, he called. She opened the door. He was at the window again, bottle in hand, but he wasn't as drunk as before. He looked at her with tired resignation. You again. Me again. She set the plate on the table. Eat or don't. I don't care anymore. Then why bring it? Because if you die, Eleanor will blame me, and I need her happy. That's it. That's the only reason. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. You worked the barns today. Yeah. Tom told you about the accident. Some of it. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, it wasn't just the fall. It was what happened after. Lying there for 6 hours before anyone found me, feeling my legs go numb, thinking I was going to die alone on that ridge. Then waking up in a bed and realizing I was still alive. But I'd never be myself again. He took a drink. Sometimes I think dying would have been easier. Saren leaned against the doorframe. Maybe. But you didn't die. You're still here. This isn't living. It's just not being dead. Then do something about it. Like what? Walk it off. Think positive? His laugh was bitter. I've tried everything. Nothing fixes it. This is all there is now. You're right, Saren said. Nothing fixes it, but you can still choose what you do with it. Easy to say when you're not in pain every second of every day. You're right again. I don't know what that's like, but I know what starving feels like. I know what watching your family die slowly feels like. I know what desperation feels like. She met his eyes. We're both trapped in things we can't fix. Difference is, I'm still fighting. You just gave up. She left before he could respond, closing the door quietly behind her. Her heart was racing again, that same mix of anger and fear and something else she couldn't name. In her room, she lay awake for hours, listening to the house settle, wondering if she'd just made things worse or better. The next morning, she found a broken plate outside her door. Not thrown this time, just set there carefully, the pieces arranged like an apology. She picked it up and carried it downstairs. Rowan was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee, looking exhausted but sober. He glanced at the broken plate in her hands. That was childish, he said. Which part? Breaking it or leaving it for me? Both. He took a sip of coffee. I'm not good at this. At what? People, talking, not being an asshole. He set the cup down. Eleanor told me to try. Said you were different, that you might actually last if I didn't destroy you first. I won't break. Already told you that. Everyone says that. Then they see what I'm really like, and they leave. I can't leave. We're married, legally bound. Saren set the broken plate on the counter. So you're stuck with me, and I'm stuck with you. We can make it miserable, or we can figure out how to exist in the same space without killing each other. Your choice. Rowan studied her for a long time. Then he said, I'll try. Not promising anything, but I'll try. Good enough. It wasn't a truce, not exactly, but it was something, a crack in the wall, small and fragile, that might grow into an opening if neither of them screwed it up first. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Seren worked the barns in the mornings, learning from Tom and the other hands. She was slow and clumsy at first, but she picked it up quickly, driven by the need to be useful. In the afternoons, she visited her mother and Micah, watching her mother grow stronger and her brother regain weight and energy. And every night, she brought a plate to Rowan's door. Sometimes he ate it. Sometimes he threw it. Sometimes he opened the door, and they talked, short, stilted conversations that never went anywhere but at least weren't hostile. He was still drinking too much, still hiding in his room most days, but there were small changes. He started coming to the kitchen in the mornings. He stopped throwing things at her. Once, she found him outside the barn, watching the hands work with an expression that might have been longing. You could help them, she said, walking up beside him. Can't do the work anymore. You could manage, give orders. They respect you. They pity me. Maybe at first, but you could earn it back. He looked at her, something raw in his eyes. You don't give up, do you? Not really my style. A week passed, then 2. Winter deepened, and the ranch slowed down, but there was still work to be done. Seren threw herself into it, working until her body gave out, sleeping hard and dreamless. It was easier than thinking. One morning, she was in the barn repairing a broken stall door when she heard raised voices outside. She walked out to find Tom arguing with another hand, a younger man named Jake, who looked furious. I'm telling you, we need to cull that herd before spring, Jake was saying. Half of them won't make it through another month. We're wasting feed on dead weight. Mr. Rowan should decide that, Tom said. Mr. Rowan doesn't decide anything anymore. He's too busy drowning in a bottle. The words hung in the cold air. Tom's face darkened. Watch your mouth. Why? Everyone knows it's true. He's useless. Has been for years. We'd be better off without him. Seren didn't think. She walked up and punched Jake in the mouth. He staggered back, blood on his lip, shock on his face. The other hands went silent, staring. Seren's knuckles were screaming, but she kept her voice level. Say that again, she said. I dare you. Jake wiped his mouth. You broke my tooth. Good. Maybe you'll think before you talk next time. He's a drunk and a cripple. That's not an insult, it's just fact. He's your boss. And my husband. And if I hear you disrespect him again, I'll do worse than break a tooth. She looked around at the other men. That goes for all of you. Rowan Vance built this ranch before any of you were here. He deserves respect, not pity, not gossip. Respect. Understood? Silence. Then Tom nodded slowly. Understood, ma'am. The others followed, some reluctant, but they all nodded. Jake spat blood into the snow and walked away without another word. Seren's hands were shaking again. She shoved them into her pockets and headed back to the barn, her face hot with anger and something else. Behind her, she heard Tom's voice. Told you she was different. That night, when she brought Rowan his dinner, he was already at the door. He looked at her hand, at the bruised knuckles, and his eyebrows rose. Clara told me you hit Jake. He deserved it. What did he say? Seren met his eyes. Nothing that matters. Must have mattered if you punched him. He was disrespectful. I made it clear that wouldn't be tolerated. Rowan stared at her, something shifting in his expression. Then he stepped aside. Come in. She hesitated. Why? Because I want to talk, and I'm tired of doing it in the doorway. She walked in slowly, wary. The room was cleaner than before. Still dark, still smelling faintly of whiskey, but the worst of the mess had been cleared. Rowan gestured to a chair by the window. She sat, and he lowered himself into the one across from her with a grimace. Jake called me useless, Rowan said. It wasn't a question. Something like that. And you defended me. Why? Because he was wrong. Was he? Rowan leaned back, his face tired. I don't work. I don't manage. I barely exist. What part of that is wrong? The part where you think that makes you useless. Seren leaned forward. You're in pain. You're angry. You've lost something you'll never get back. But you're still here. You could have put that gun to your head 100 times, but you didn't. That's not useless. That's survival. Survival isn't enough. It's a start. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the wind howled through the eaves. Finally, Rowan spoke again. The ranch is failing, not catastrophically, but slowly. The hands don't respect Eleanor's management, and I'm not there to fill the gap. In another year, maybe 2, we'll start losing money. In 5, we might lose the whole thing. So fix it. I can't ride anymore. Can't work cattle. Can't do any of the things that made me good at this. Then do the things you still can. Manage. Plan. Lead. She met his eyes. You're only useless if you choose to be. He looked at her for a long time, and she saw the war happening behind his eyes, the want to try fighting against the fear of failing, the anger battling with something that might have been hope. I don't know if I can, he said finally. Then find out. Because sitting in this room drinking yourself to death isn't working, and if this ranch fails, my family goes down with it. So either help me save it or get out of the way and let me try alone. The words were harsh, and she saw them land like blows. But Rowan didn't flinch. Instead, he nodded slowly. All right. All right, what? All right, I'll try. Tomorrow. I'll go out to the barn and talk to Tom about the herd, figure out what needs to be done. He looked at her. But I'm going to fail. I'm going to hurt and I'm going to want to quit. And I'm probably going to be an asshole about it. I can handle it. Can you? I've handled worse. He smiled then, just slightly. The first real smile she'd seen from him. Yeah, I think you have. Rowan showed up at the barn the next morning looking like he hadn't slept. His face was drawn, his hands shaking slightly as he gripped his cane, but he was there. The ranch hands stopped what they were doing, staring at him like he was a ghost. Tom recovered first, wiping his hands on his pants and walking over. Boss, good to see you out here. Don't call me that yet, I'm just here to talk. Rowan's voice was rough but steady. Jake around? He's in the south pasture, checking fence line. Good. I need to talk to you about the herd first. They walked toward the corral, Rowan moving slowly, his jaw tight with pain. Saren watched from the barn doorway, her arms crossed, ready to step in if he collapsed or if any of the hands gave him trouble. But they just watched, cautious and curious. Tom and Rowan talked for 20 minutes, their voices low. Saren couldn't hear what they were saying, but she saw Rowan's posture shift, saw him straighten up slightly, saw something in his face that looked almost like the man he used to be. When they finished, Tom nodded and headed toward the south pasture. Rowan stood there alone for a moment, staring at the mountains in the distance, before turning and limping back toward the house. He passed Sareen without speaking, but she saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the way his hands gripped the cane so hard his knuckles were white. She didn't follow him. She went back to work, mucking stalls and trying not to think about how hard that walk had been for him, how much it must have cost him just to stand out there and pretend to be whole. That afternoon, Tom found her in the feed room. He's making changes. Wants us to cull the weak cattle before spring, rotate the grazing patterns, bring in 2 new bulls from the Simpson Ranch. Tom looked impressed despite himself. He remembers everything, every detail about this place. 3 years gone and he still knows it better than any of us. He just needed a reason to care again, maybe. Or maybe he needed someone who wouldn't let him quit. Tom smiled slightly. You did that. Don't know if you realize it, but you did. Saren didn't respond. She finished filling the feed bags and carried them out to the horses, her mind turning over Tom's words. She hadn't set out to change Rowan. She'd just refused to let him rot, refused to play along with his self-destruction. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all anyone needed sometimes, someone stubborn enough to stand in the way of their worst impulses. When she brought dinner to Rowan's room that night, he was sitting at the desk with a stack of papers spread out in front of him, a lamp burning low beside him. He looked up when she entered. Ranch accounts, he said, gesturing at the papers. Eleanor's been managing them, but she's not a rancher. She's made mistakes. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to cost us. Can you fix it? I think so. It'll take time, and I'll need to be more involved, which means more pain, more days where I can't do anything but lie in bed and hate myself. He rubbed his face. But yeah, I think I can fix it. Saren set the plate down. You should eat. I will, in a minute. He looked at her. Why did you push me? Really? It wasn't just about Eleanor or keeping the ranch afloat. You could have left me alone.
Done your time, gotten what you needed for your family without caring whether I lived or died. She thought about lying, about giving him some easy answer. But Rowan had been honest with her about his pain, his failures, his fear. She owed him the same.
Because I know what giving up looks like, she said. My father did it. Died because he was too proud and too tired to keep fighting. And I watched him go, and I couldn't stop him, and I swore I'd never watch someone do that again if I could help it. She met his eyes. You were drowning. I just refused to let you. Even though you don't owe me anything. No, I don't. But maybe that's exactly why I could do it. He nodded slowly like he understood something he hadn't before. Then he picked up his fork and started eating, and Saren left him to his work. The days started to shift after that. Rowan came out to the barn more often, talking to the hands, making decisions, slowly rebuilding the respect he'd lost. It wasn't smooth. Some days the pain was too much and he'd disappear back into his room for hours, emerging later with bloodshot eyes and the smell of whiskey on his breath. Other days he'd push too hard and collapse halfway through, needing help back to the house while he cursed and raged at his own body's betrayal. But he kept trying, and the hands started to respond, slowly at first, then with more confidence. They stopped second-guessing his orders. They started coming to him with problems instead of Eleanor. The ranch began to tighten up, the work becoming more efficient, the waste decreasing. And through it all, Saren kept working. She learned to rope, to ride, to read cattle. The hands taught her grudgingly at first, then with genuine respect when they saw how hard she worked. She wasn't trying to replace Rowan or prove anything to anyone. She just needed to move, to work, to feel useful. Sitting still felt like dying. 3 weeks into the new routine, Eleanor showed up at the barn while Saren was brushing down one of the horses. The older woman watched from the doorway for a moment before speaking. You've changed things here. Saren didn't stop brushing. I'm just working. You got my nephew out of his room, got him managing again. That's more than work. Eleanor stepped closer. I wasn't sure you could do it. Thought you'd run like the others, or give up, or just exist in parallel without ever actually touching his life. I'm glad I was wrong. I didn't do it for you. I know. That's why it worked. Eleanor's voice softened slightly. Your mother is doing well. The doctor says she's recovering faster than expected. And your brother is thriving. You should be proud. I'm surviving, that's all. Is that really all this is to you? Survival? Saren finally stopped and looked at Eleanor. What else is there? I don't know. Maybe nothing. But you're working harder than you need to for someone who's just surviving. You're pushing Rowan harder than necessary for someone who doesn't care. So maybe it's more than survival. Or maybe it's becoming more, whether you want it to or not. Eleanor left before Saren could respond. The words stayed with her all day, itching under her skin like a splinter she couldn't reach. She didn't want it to be more than survival. Survival was clean, transactional, safe. Anything else was too complicated, too risky, too much like hoping for things she'd learned not to hope for. That night at dinner, Rowan showed up. Not in his room, but in the actual dining room, limping in and lowering himself into a chair with a grimace. Clara nearly dropped the serving dish in shock. Mr. Rowan, should I set another place? Already sitting here, Clara. Seems like the place is set. Saren stared at him from the other end of the long table. What are you doing? Eating dinner in the dining room, like a normal person. He looked uncomfortable, his fingers drumming against the table. Eleanor said we should at least pretend to be married sometimes. Apparently eating in the same room counts. Eleanor has a lot of opinions. She does, most of them right, which is annoying. He gestured at the empty chairs between them. You can stay down there if you want. I'm not going to bite. Saren stood, picked up her plate, and moved to the seat across from him. Close enough to talk without shouting, far enough that it didn't feel claustrophobic. Clara served them both, her face carefully neutral, and then retreated to the kitchen. They ate in silence for a while. It wasn't comfortable exactly, but it wasn't hostile either. Finally, Rowan spoke. Tom says you're learning fast. Says you've got good instincts with the horses. Tom's generous. Tom doesn't lie. If he says you're good, you're good. Rowan cut his meat awkwardly with his left hand, his right still gripping the table edge for balance. You don't have to work yourself to death out there. That wasn't part of the deal. Neither was you coming back to work. But here we are. Fair point. He took a bite, chewed slowly. Why do you do it? The ranch work.
You could stay in the house, live easy, visit your family. Nobody would judge you for it. I'd judge me for it.
Why?
Saren set down her fork. Because sitting around doing nothing makes me feel like I'm waiting to die. I need to move, need to work. It's the only way I know how to exist. Rowan nodded like he understood. I get that. After the accident, when I couldn't work anymore, I felt like I'd already died. Like I was just a corpse waiting for someone to bury me. The drinking was just a way to speed it up. And now? Now I don't know. It still hurts. Every single day, every single step. But at least I'm doing something with the pain instead of just drowning in it. He looked at her. That's because of you, in case that wasn't clear. I didn't do anything. You did everything. You didn't pity me, didn't try to fix me. You just refused to let me disappear. Nobody's done that before.
Saren didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and went back to eating. They finished the meal in silence, but it felt different now. Less like two strangers forced together, more like two people learning to exist in the same space without constantly bracing for impact. When they were done, Rowan pushed himself up slowly. Thank you, for dinner. It's just food. I meant for eating with me. It's been a long time since I ate with another person. I forgot what it was like. He limped out before she could respond, leaving Saren alone at the long table with too many thoughts crowding her head. The next week brought the first real test. A late winter storm rolled in, dumping 2 feet of snow and dropping the temperature so low that the water troughs froze solid. The hands worked around the clock to keep the cattle alive, breaking ice, hauling feed, checking for frostbite and injury. Saren was out there with them, her face raw from the wind, her hands numb inside her gloves. On the second day of the storm, one of the pregnant cows went into labor in the north pasture. Tom came running to find Saren in the barn, his face urgent. It's bad. Calf is breech, and the cow's struggling. We need help. Where's Rowan? In the house. Haven't seen him all morning. Saren dropped what she was doing and ran toward the house, her boots slipping in the snow. She found Rowan in his room, not drunk, but clearly in pain, his face pale and drawn. He looked up when she burst in. What's wrong? Cow in labor, breech birth, Tom needs help. He stood immediately, grabbing his cane. Let's go. You can barely walk today. You'll just slow us down. Then I'll slow you down, but I'm not staying here while one of my animals dies. He moved past her, limping toward the door. Come on. They made it to the north pasture, Rowan leaning heavily on Saren for the last 100 yards. The cow was down in the snow, her sides heaving, her eyes rolling with pain. Tom and Jake were already there, Jake with his arms inside the cow up to his shoulders, trying to turn the calf. Rowan dropped to his knees beside them, his face going even paler with pain. But his hands were steady. Talk to me. Where are we? Calf's backwards, front legs are folded wrong. I can't get them straightened out. Let me try. Jake moved aside and Rowan took his place, his hands disappearing into the cow. His face was a mask of concentration, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. Saren knelt beside him, unsure what to do but unwilling to leave. Got one leg, Rowan said through gritted teeth. Come on, baby, work with me. The cow bellowed, thrashing weakly. Tom held her head, murmuring quiet words. Saren put her hand on Rowan's back, steadying him, and felt the tension in his body, the effort it was taking him to stay focused through his own pain. Second leg, Rowan said. Jake, help me pull, gentle but firm. On 3. 1, 2, 3. They pulled together and the calf slid free in a rush of fluid and blood. It lay still in the snow for a terrible moment, not breathing. Then Rowan cleared its mouth and nose, rubbing it roughly with handfuls of snow, and the calf gasped and shuddered to life. The cow struggled to her feet, turning to nose at her baby. The calf was already trying to stand, wobbly and wet and alive. Tom laughed, relieved, and Jake slapped Rowan on the shoulder. Thought we'd lost them both. Nice work, boss. Rowan didn't respond. He was still kneeling in the snow, his whole body shaking, his face twisted with pain. Saren realized he'd been holding everything in, pushing through, and now that the crisis was over, his body was done cooperating. Tom, help me, she said. Together they got Rowan upright, half carrying him back toward the house. He tried to protest, but he didn't have the strength. By the time they got him inside, he was barely conscious, his face gray. They got him to his room and onto the bed, and Saren sent Tom for the doctor. She stayed with Rowan while they waited, wiping the sweat from his face with a damp cloth, watching his chest rise and fall in shallow, painful breaths. His eyes opened once, unfocused. Calf?
Alive, mother too. You saved them. Good. His eyes closed again. Worth it. The doctor arrived an hour later, examined Rowan, and gave him something for the pain. He pushed too hard. His body can only take so much. He needs rest, warmth, and no exertion for at least a week. He won't listen. Then make him listen, because if he does this again, he might not recover. The doctor left, and Saren sat in the chair by Rowan's bed, watching him sleep. His face was peaceful for the first time since she'd met him, the pain smoothed away by whatever the doctor had given him. She thought about what he'd said, that it was worth it, risking his own collapse to save a cow and her calf, because that's what a rancher did. That's who he still was, under all the pain and anger and whiskey. She stayed there all night, dozing in the chair, waking whenever he stirred. By morning, his color was better and his breathing had evened out. When his eyes opened, they were clear. You stayed. Someone had to make sure you didn't die in your sleep. I'm fine. You're not fine. You collapsed. The doctor said you pushed too hard. I did what needed to be done, and nearly killed yourself doing it. She leaned forward. You can't keep doing this, working yourself into the ground to prove you're still useful. You are useful. You already proved it. But you have limits, and you need to accept them. I don't accept limits. Then you're an idiot. He stared at her, and then he laughed, sharp and surprised. You really don't hold back, do you? Not when someone's being stupid, no. Most people would have let me keep pushing. Figured it was my choice, my consequences. I'm not most people, and you're not allowed to die yet. We have a deal, remember? Right, the deal. He looked at her for a long moment. Is that still all this is to you? The question hung between them, heavy with meaning. Saren thought about Eleanor's words, about how she was working harder than she needed to, pushing Rowan harder than necessary. She thought about sitting in this chair all night, watching him breathe, feeling relieved every time his chest rose and fell. I don't know, she said honestly. I don't know what this is anymore. Yeah, me neither. They sat in silence, the morning light creeping through the window, and something shifted between them. Not love, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it, like the first crack of ice on a frozen river, waiting to see if the thaw would hold or if winter would clamp down again and freeze everything solid. Rowan stayed in bed for 3 days, hating every minute of it. Saren brought him meals, sat with him when he couldn't sleep, and read him ranch reports when he was too restless to lie still. They talked more than they ever had before, about the ranch, about their pasts, about nothing in particular. The conversations were stilted and awkward sometimes, but they were real. No more walls, no more hiding behind anger and alcohol. On the 4th day, Rowan was up and moving again, slower than before but determined. He walked to the barn with Saren at his side, not leaning on her but close enough that she could catch him if he fell. The hands greeted him with respect that had nothing to do with pity. They'd seen him save that calf. They knew what it had cost him. How's the mother? Rowan asked Tom. Doing fine. Calf's nursing strong. You did good work. We did good work. Rowan looked around at the men gathered there. All of us. This ranch works because we work together. I forgot that for a while. Won't forget again. The men nodded, and there was something in their faces that looked like loyalty. Real loyalty. Earned and genuine. Saren watched Rowan stand there, addressing his crew, and saw the man he used to be blending with the man he was becoming. Not the same, maybe never the same, but something new. Something that might be just as strong. That night they ate dinner together again, this time at the middle of the table instead of at opposite ends. It felt less ridiculous that way, less like a performance. They talked about the ranch, about the upcoming spring calving season, about whether they should expand the horse breeding program. We used to have the best horses in the territory, Rowan said. Before the accident, I'd break and train them myself. Sold them all over Montana. Good money, good reputation. You could do it again. Can't break horses from a chair. No, but you could train someone else to do it. Teach them your methods, oversee the program. He considered that. Maybe.
Be strange watching someone else do what I used to do. Better than watching the program die completely. You're always so practical. Someone has to be. They finished eating and Rowan stood to leave, but he paused by her chair, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder. Thank you for staying with me when I was sick. You would have done the same, would I? Yeah, I think you would. His hand squeezed once, gentle, and then he was gone. Saren sat alone in the dining room, feeling the ghost of his touch on her shoulder, and wondered when this had stopped being just survival, when it had become something else, something unnamed and terrifying and maybe, possibly, worth the risk. Spring started to show itself in small ways. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass underneath. The days grew longer. The cattle started to look healthier, their winter coats thinning. And Saren realized she'd been at the ranch for 3 months. 3 months of work and conflict and slow, painful progress. Her mother was fully recovered now, helping Clara in the kitchen and the house, her face filled with color and life. Micah had grown 2 inches and gained 10 pounds, his cough completely gone. He'd started learning to read from one of Eleanor's old books, sounding out words with fierce concentration. When Saren visited them, they seemed happy. Actually happy, not just surviving. You did this, her mother said one afternoon, pulling Saren aside. You saved us. I made a deal, that's all. No. You sacrificed yourself. And now look at you. Her mother touched Saren's face. You look different, stronger, but also softer somehow. Like something in you is healing too. I'm fine, Mama. You're more than fine. And that man, your husband, he looks at you different now, like you're something real to him. We have an arrangement, that's all. But her mother just smiled, that knowing smile mothers had when they saw something their children couldn't see yet. Sure, an arrangement. Keep telling yourself that. The conversation bothered Saren more than she wanted to admit. She went back to work, throwing herself into fixing fence line in the upper pasture, trying to shake the feeling that things were shifting faster than she could control. That evening, she found Rowan in the barn working with one of the young horses. He was using a long lead, working the horse in circles, his movements careful and controlled. The horse responded beautifully, stepping and turning with just the slightest pressure from the rope. Thought you couldn't do this anymore, Sareen said, leaning against the fence. Can't break them. But I can do groundwork, teach them to trust and respond. It's not the same, but it's something. He brought the horse to a stop and ran his hand down its neck. I'm starting the program again. Small scale, just a few horses at a time. But it's a start. That's good. It's because of you. You pushed me to find what I could still do instead of mourning what I lost. He led the horse over to where she stood. I've been thinking, this arrangement we have, this marriage, it's been more than I expected. More than I deserved, probably. Don't do that. Don't act like I did you some favor. This was a business deal, remember? Was. Past tense. He looked at her. I don't know what it is now, but it's not just business anymore. At least not for me. Saren's heart was hammering. Rowan, I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not even asking you to stay past whatever timeline you had in your head. I just need you to know that this, us, whatever it is, it matters to me. You matter to me. She wanted to run, wanted to retreat back behind the safe walls of survival and transaction. But she'd pushed Rowan to be honest, to face his fear and pain. She owed him the same. It matters to me too, she said quietly. I don't know what that means. I don't know how to do this, how to be more than just surviving, but I'm scared of it. Yeah, me too. They stood there in the barn, the horse between them, the late afternoon sun slanting through the open doors. 2 broken people who'd been shoved together by desperation and necessity, who'd fought and pushed and challenged each other until something new emerged from the wreckage. We could try, Rowan said, to be more than an arrangement. No promises, no guarantees, just trying. What if it doesn't work? Then at least we tried. That's more than I've done in years. Saren thought about her father, who'd died alone because he was too afraid to ask for help. She thought about all the months she'd spent just surviving, never hoping, never risking. She thought about Rowan, 3 months ago, drowning in his own pain and rage. And she thought about who they'd become since then, together. Okay, she said. We try. He smiled, and it was genuine, reaching his eyes for the first time since she'd known him. Okay. They stood there as the sun set, talking about nothing important, just existing together. And for the first time in longer than Saran could remember, the future felt like something that might be worth living for, not just surviving through. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. Find resources. Trying turned out to be harder than either of them expected, not because they didn't want it, but because neither of them knew how to do it. They'd both spent so long just surviving that the idea of actually living, of building something real between them, felt like learning a foreign language with no dictionary. The first week after their conversation in the barn, nothing changed on the surface. They still worked, still ate dinner together, still talked about the ranch. But there was a new tension underneath it all, a constant awareness of each other that hadn't been there before. Saran would catch herself watching Rowan work with the horses, noticing the way his hands moved, gentle and sure. And she'd look up from mucking stalls to find him watching her, his expression unreadable. "This is weird," she said one night at dinner. "What is?" "This. Us. Trying to be more than business partners while still being business partners." Rowan set down his fork. "You want to stop trying?" "No, I just don't know what I'm doing." "Neither do I. But I figure we just keep doing what we've been doing, except now we admit it matters." He paused. "Although maybe we could start small, like actually talking about things that aren't the ranch." "What else is there to talk about?" "I don't know. Normal things. Things people talk about when they're getting to know each other." Saran thought about it. "I don't think I know how to have normal conversations anymore." "Me neither. So we'll both be bad at it together." They tried. That night, after dinner, they sat in the front room with coffee, and Rowan asked her about her childhood. She told him about growing up in the mountains, about her father teaching her to hunt, about the year her mother got sick the first time and almost died. He listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he told her about his own parents, both dead now, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the first time he broke a wild horse and felt like he'd found his purpose. It was awkward and stilted, their words coming out clumsy and uncertain, but it was something, a start. The next night, they did it again. And the night after that. Slowly, piece by piece, they learned each other. Not the versions they'd been when they first met, but the people they actually were. Saran learned that Rowan had wanted to be a doctor when he was young, before the ranch claimed him. Rowan learned that Saran used to draw, sketching animals and landscapes in the margins of old newspapers, until her father told her it was a waste of time. "You should draw again," Rowan said. "Don't have time. Make time. You push me to do things I thought I couldn't do anymore. Maybe you should take your own advice." So she did. She found paper and a pencil, and in the evenings after work, she'd sketch. Her hands were clumsy at first, the lines rough and uncertain. But slowly, the skill came back. She drew the ranch, the horses, the mountains in the distance. And one night, without really thinking about it, she drew Rowan working with a young colt, his face concentrated, his hands gentle on the lead rope. He found the drawing on the kitchen table the next morning. She'd left it there by accident, and when she realized, she tried to grab it back, but he held it out of reach. "This is good. Really good. It's just a sketch. It's more than that. It's how you see things." He looked at the drawing, then at her. "Is this how you see me?" She'd drawn him strong, capable, focused, not broken or bitter or defeated. She'd drawn the man he was becoming, not the man he'd been. "Yeah," she said. "That's how I see you." He folded the paper carefully and put it in his pocket. "I'm keeping this." "Why?" "Because I need to remember that someone sees me like this, especially on the bad days." There were still bad days, days when the pain was too much, when Rowan couldn't get out of bed, when he'd snap at everyone and retreat back into that dark place where Saran first found him. But now he didn't stay there as long. Saran would sit with him, not trying to fix anything, just being present. And slowly, he'd come back. And there were bad days for Saran too. Days when the weight of everything crashed down on her, when she'd remember what it felt like to be truly desperate, to watch her family starving and know there was nothing she could do. On those days, she'd work herself into exhaustion, pushing harder and harder until her body gave out. Rowan learned to recognize the signs. He'd find her in the barn or the pasture and just say, "Stop. I can't." "Yes, you can.
Come inside. Rest. I don't need rest. Maybe not. But I need you to rest. Because watching you destroy yourself scares me, and I don't know how to help except to make you stop. The honesty of it, the raw admission that he cared enough to be scared, would cut through her panic. And she'd stop and let him lead her inside and sit by the fire while he made her tea and didn't say anything, just stayed close. They were learning each other's damage, learning how to exist alongside it without trying to fix it or run from it. It wasn't pretty or easy, but it was real. 6 weeks after their conversation in the barn, spring arrived in full. The snow melted completely, revealing green grass and wildflowers. The cattle were moved to the upper pastures, and the ranch hands spent long days repairing fences and preparing for calving season. Rowan was out there with them more often now, managing the work, making decisions, slowly reclaiming his place as the true head of the ranch. Eleanor noticed. She showed up one morning unannounced, walking through the ranch yard with that sharp, assessing gaze. She watched Rowan work with the men for a while, then found Saren in the tack room cleaning saddles. "He's different," Eleanor said without preamble. "Stronger, more like himself." "He did that himself, with your help. Don't pretend otherwise." Eleanor leaned against the doorframe. "I made this arrangement because I was desperate. I thought if I could just get someone strong enough to tolerate him, maybe he'd stop destroying himself. I didn't expect it to actually work. And I certainly didn't expect this." "Expect what?" "The two of you, actually caring about each other." Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "I've been managing marriages and business deals my whole life. I can spot the difference. This isn't business anymore." Saren didn't deny it. "Does that bother you?" "No. It relieves me. Business deals can be broken. What you two have is harder to walk away from, which means the ranch is safer, Rowan is safer, and your family is safer." Eleanor straightened up. "I'm giving you full access to the ranch accounts. You and Rowan both. It's time you stopped being just his wife on paper and started being his actual partner in this." "I don't know anything about managing a ranch." "You know more than you think. And what you don't know, you'll learn. Rowan will teach you." Eleanor started to leave, then paused. "You saved him, you know. I couldn't do it, and I tried for 3 years. But you did it in 3 months. Don't underestimate what that means." After Eleanor left, Saren sat alone in the tack room, the weight of the conversation settling over her. Partner. Not employee, not convenient wife, but partner. It should have scared her. Instead, it felt right, like something clicking into place that she hadn't known was misaligned. That night, she told Rowan about Eleanor's visit. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, coffee in their hands and the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night around them. "She wants us to manage the accounts together," Saren said. "I know, she told me too." He glanced at her. "You okay with that?" "I think so. It's just strange. 3 months ago I was starving in a falling down cabin. Now I'm managing a ranch. 3 months ago I was drowning in a bottle waiting to die. Now I'm sitting here drinking coffee and watching the sunset with someone who actually wants my company. Strange doesn't begin to cover it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Rowan said, "I want to show you something. Tomorrow, if you're willing." "Show me what?" "The ridge, where I fell." Saren looked at him. His face was serious, his eyes fixed on the mountains. "Why?" "Because I've been avoiding it for 3 years, and I think it's time to stop running from it. But I don't want to go alone." "You sure you're ready?" "No, but I don't think I'll ever be ready, so might as well do it anyway." The next morning, they rode out before dawn, just the two of them. Rowan on his steadiest horse, moving carefully but with growing confidence, and Saren beside him on the mare she'd been training. The ride took 2 hours, climbing up into the high country where the air was thin and cold and the views stretched for miles. They reached the ridge just as the sun was coming up. Rowan dismounted slowly, using his cane for balance, and walked to the edge. Saren stayed close, ready to grab him if he stumbled, but he was steady. He stood there looking down at the rocks below, his face pale but calm. "I was chasing a stray heifer," he said quietly. "She'd gotten loose and was heading for the drop. I pushed my horse too hard trying to turn her back, and he spooked. Threw me right over his head," he pointed down. "Landed there. Don't remember much after that except the pain and the cold and thinking I was going to die alone."
But you didn't.
No. Tom found me 6 hours later, thought I was dead at first. Rowan turned away from the edge. I've had nightmares about this place ever since. About falling, about the impact, about lying there helpless. I started to believe the ridge itself was cursed, that it broke me and I could never come back. And now? Now I'm here, and I'm terrified. But I'm also standing. He looked at her. You asked me once what I was fighting for. I didn't have an answer then, but I do now. What is it? This. Being here with you. Having a reason to get up in the morning that isn't just spite or obligation. Actually wanting to see what comes next instead of just enduring it. He reached out and took her hand. I'm fighting for us. Whatever that means, whatever it becomes. I want it. Saren's throat was tight. I'm not good at this, at letting people in, at hoping for things. I know, but you're doing it anyway. You're trying. That's all I'm asking. She squeezed his hand. The ridge didn't break you. It just changed you. There's a difference. Is there? Yeah, broken means you can't be put back together. Changed means you become something new. You're not the same man who fell off this ridge 3 years ago, but you're not broken. You're just different.
He pulled her closer, and for the first time they stood together without the weight of a contract or desperation between them. Just two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and somehow made something real out of it. I'm still scared, Rowan said. Me too. Good. Let's be scared together. They stayed on the ridge for an hour, not talking much, just existing in that space where Rowan's worst moment had happened, reclaiming it, making it less about loss and more about survival. When they finally mounted up to leave, Rowan looked back one more time. I don't think I'll have nightmares about this place anymore. What will you have instead? Memories. Of standing here with you. Of choosing to face it instead of running. He turned his horse toward home. That's better than nightmares. The ride back was easier, lighter. They talked about plans for the ranch, about the upcoming calving season, about whether they should expand into sheep or stick with cattle. Normal conversations, the kind partners had. It felt good. It felt right. When they got back to the ranch, Tom was waiting with news. We got a buyer interested in 3 of the yearlings. Good price, too. They want to come see them tomorrow. Set it up, Rowan said. Saren, you should be there for the negotiation. You've been working with those horses. You know them as well as I do. She started to protest, but he cut her off. This is your ranch too now. Start acting like it. The sale went through the next day, and Saren found herself negotiating prices and terms like she'd been doing it her whole life. The buyer was impressed with the horses and with the ranch, and by the end, they'd agreed to take 5 horses instead of 3, at a price that made Tom whistle low and long. You're a natural, he told Saren afterward. Got your grandmother's gift for reading people and knowing when to push. I didn't know my grandmother, neither did I. But I've heard stories. She was a hell of a negotiator. That night, Rowan opened a bottle of whiskey, the good stuff that Eleanor kept in the study. He poured 2 glasses and handed one to Saren. To our first sale as partners. I didn't do much. You did everything. You spotted the weakness in his initial offer, pushed back at exactly the right moment, and sealed the deal on terms that benefit us for years. That's not nothing. They drank, and the whiskey burned warm and smooth. Saren felt something settle in her chest, a sense of belonging she hadn't felt since before her father died. This was her place now. This was her life. Not something she'd been forced into, but something she was choosing. I want to make this real, she said suddenly. Rowan set down his glass. What do you mean? I mean the marriage. I know it started as a contract, as desperation and necessity, but I don't want it to be that anymore. I want it to be real. It already feels real to me. Then let's make it official. Let's get married again, but this time because we want to, not because we have to. He stared at her, and she saw hope and fear warring in his expression. You're sure? No, I'm terrified, but I'm sure I want to try. I'm sure I want this with you, whatever this becomes. Then yes, we'll do it right this time. They planned the wedding for 2 weeks later, at the end of spring when the wildflowers were in full bloom. It would be small, just family and the ranch hands, nothing fancy or formal, just real. Saren's mother cried when she heard, You're sure this is what you want? Not what you think you have to do? I'm sure, Mama. I love him. I don't know when it happened, but it did. Her mother pulled her close. I'm so happy for you. You deserve this. You deserve to be loved, and to love someone who sees you for exactly who you are. Micah was less sentimental. Does this mean I can stop worrying about you? When did you worry about me? Every day since Papa died. Every day you went out hunting and I didn't know if you'd come back. Every day you looked like you were going to break but refused to. He hugged her tight. I'm glad you found someone who makes you want to stay. The 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and work. The ranch hands built an arch out of pine branches and wove wildflowers through it. Clara cooked enough food to feed an army. Eleanor arrived the day before with a dress she'd commissioned, simple and beautiful, cream-colored with embroidered flowers along the hem. It's too much, Saren protested. It's exactly right. You're marrying my nephew for real this time. You'll do it properly. The night before the wedding, Saren couldn't sleep. She walked out to the barn and found Rowan there, sitting on a hay bale, staring at nothing. You nervous? She asked, sitting beside him. Terrified. What if I mess this up? What if I hurt you or fail you or fall back into that dark place and you can't pull me out? Then I'll pull you out anyway. That's what we do. We keep each other from drowning. What if it's not enough? Then we'll figure it out together. That's what partnership means. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep trying. He looked at her, and in the dim light of the barn, his eyes were wet. I don't deserve you. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. He laughed, and it broke the tension. They sat together in the barn until dawn, talking about everything and nothing, until the fear faded and only anticipation remained. The wedding took place in the late afternoon, with the sun low in the sky and the mountains glowing gold and purple behind them. Saren wore the dress Eleanor had given her, wildflowers woven into her hair. Rowan wore a new suit, standing straight with only one cane for support, his face clean and clear and full of something that looked like joy. They stood under the arch, facing each other, with Tom officiating because he'd once been a minister before he became a ranch hand. The ceremony was simple. No fancy words, no religious rituals, just promises made in front of people they loved. Do you take this woman to be your wife, to stand beside her through whatever comes, to be her partner in everything? I do. And I mean it this time. Do you take this man to be your husband, to stand beside him through whatever comes, to be his partner in everything? I do. For real this time. They exchanged new rings, simple bands they'd chosen together in town. And when Tom said they could kiss, Rowan pulled her close and kissed her like she was something precious, something worth fighting for. The ranch hands cheered and her mother cried and Micah whistled loud enough to scare the horses. Afterward, they ate and drank and danced under the stars. Rowan danced with her slowly, carefully, his movements limited but his smile genuine. He was in pain. She could see it in his eyes, but he didn't stop. He stayed with her, holding her close, until the last song ended. This is the best day of my life, he said quietly. Better than before the accident? So much better. Because before I didn't know what I had. I didn't appreciate it. Now I know exactly how precious this is, how precious you are. They walked back to the house together, and for the first time, Saren went to Rowan's room not to bring him dinner or check on him, but because it was where she wanted to be. They lay together in the darkness, talking until exhaustion finally pulled them under. And when Saren woke the next morning, sunlight streaming through the window, Rowan's arm around her waist, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not just safety or security, but actual happiness. The kind that came from choosing someone and having them choose you back. Not out of desperation, but out of genuine want. The ranch thrived under their joint management. The horse breeding program expanded and buyers came from all over the territory. The cattle operation grew more efficient, more profitable. And the hands worked harder because they were working for people they respected, people who'd proven themselves through action rather than birthright. Saren and Rowan fell into a rhythm, their partnership growing stronger with each passing week. They fought sometimes, sharp arguments about ranch decisions or personal boundaries, but they learned to fight fair, to actually listen instead of just defending their positions. And they learned to apologize when they were wrong, to admit mistakes, to ask for help when they needed it. 6 months after the second wedding, Saren's mother pulled her aside during dinner. You look happy, really, truly happy. I am. It's strange. I spent so long just trying to survive that I forgot what happiness even felt like. You deserve it. You fought for it. Her mother squeezed her hand. Your father would be proud, even if he'd never admit it. Papa would hate this. He'd say I sold out, that I should have kept fighting on my own. Maybe. Or maybe he'd see that asking for help isn't weakness, that accepting partnership isn't surrender, that surviving alone is just existing, but surviving together is actually living. That night, lying in bed beside Rowan, Saren thought about her mother's words. Surviving together is actually living. She'd built her whole identity around self-sufficiency, around needing no one. But that had been lonely and desperate and ultimately unsustainable. This, what she had now with Rowan, was so much better. Messy and imperfect and sometimes difficult, but better. What are you thinking about? Rowan asked, his voice sleepy. How different my life is now, how different I am. You regret it? No, not even a little bit. He pulled her closer. Good, because I'm never letting you go. That's not romantic. That's just possessive. Fine. Then I'm romantically possessive. Deal with it. She laughed, and he kissed her, and they fell asleep tangled together, two people who'd been broken in different ways and somehow made something whole out of their jagged edges. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Word spread about the quality of their horses and the integrity of their operation. Eleanor stepped back more and more, letting Rowan and Saren run things completely. She still visited regularly, but her role had shifted from manager to advisor. One day in late summer, she found Saren and Rowan working on the books together in the study, their heads bent close over the ledgers, arguing amicably about whether to invest in new equipment or save the money for winter. You two have exceeded every expectation I had, Eleanor said from the doorway. They looked up, surprised. Eleanor rarely interrupted their work. I thought if I could just keep Rowan from killing himself, that would be enough. If I could give you a safe place for your family, that would satisfy the contract. But you've built something beyond that. You've made this ranch stronger than it's been in a decade. You've created a real partnership, a real marriage. You've done what I couldn't do, which is give Rowan a reason to care about living instead of just not dying. We did it together, Rowan said. I couldn't have done any of this without her. I know, that's what makes it work. Eleanor smiled, and it was genuine. I'm transferring full ownership to you both. The ranch is yours equally. You've more than earned it. Saren stared at her. Eleanor, you can't. I can, and I am. I'm getting old, and I want to spend my remaining years knowing this place is in good hands. Your hands. She set a folder on the desk. It's all legal, already drawn up. Just needs your signatures. After she left, Saren and Rowan sat in stunned silence, staring at the papers. We own the ranch, Saren said finally. We own the ranch. How did this happen? 6 months ago I was starving. Now I own one of the largest ranches in Montana. You worked for it. You earned it. And you turned a desperate deal into something real. Rowan took her hand. We built this together. Every bit of it. They signed the papers, their names side by side, equal partners in every sense. And when they walked out of the study, the ranch looked different somehow. Not because anything had physically changed, but because they were seeing it through new eyes. Their ranch, their home, their future. That evening, they stood on the porch together, watching the sun set over their land. The mountains rose dark against the sky, beautiful and harsh and unforgiving. The same mountains that had nearly killed them both in different ways. But they'd survived, and they'd done more than survive. They'd built something worth having, something worth fighting for. You know what I realized today? Rowan said. What? The ridge doesn't scare me anymore. None of it scares me anymore. The pain, the limitations, the fear that I'll never be enough. I used to let all of that control me. But now I have something bigger to focus on. What's that? Us. This life we're building. The future instead of the past. He pulled her close. You gave me that. You gave me a reason to stop looking backward and start looking forward. We gave each other that. They stood there as darkness fell. Two people who'd started as strangers in a contract marriage and became something neither of them could have predicted. Partners, lovers, friends. Two broken souls who'd found each other in the cold and built something warm enough to last through any winter. 3 years passed, and the ranch became something neither of them could have imagined that first frozen winter, when desperation had brought them together. The horse breeding program had earned a reputation across 3 territories,
and buyers traveled from as far as California to see their stock. The cattle operation ran with precision that made neighboring ranchers ask for advice. And Saren and Rowan had become the kind of partners people pointed to as proof that hard work and commitment could build something lasting. But success didn't erase the scars. Rowan still had bad days when the pain flared so viciously he couldn't stand, when old demons whispered that he was still broken, still less than he should be. And Saren still woke sometimes in the middle of the night, heart racing with the memory of starvation, of watching her family fade, of that terrible helplessness that no amount of security could fully erase. They'd learned to weather those storms together. On Rowan's worst days, Saren would sit with him and read ranch reports aloud, keeping him connected even when his body betrayed him. On Saren's panic-filled nights, Rowan would hold her and remind her that they had enough, that her family was safe, that she didn't have to carry everything alone anymore. It was a Tuesday morning in early autumn when Saren realized she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but had been too superstitious to confirm it, too afraid of hoping for something that might not be real. But the signs were unmistakable now, and when the doctor confirmed it during his monthly visit to check on her mother, Saren sat alone in the exam room feeling equal parts terrified and amazed. She didn't tell Rowan right away. Instead, she walked out to the ridge where he'd fallen 3 years ago, the place they'd reclaimed together. She stood at the edge looking down at the rocks below, thinking about how much had changed since that desperate winter, how a contract marriage had become real love, how two broken people had learned to be whole together, how survival had transformed into actual living. And now there would be a child, a person created not from desperation or necessity, but from choice, from love. The thought scared her more than she wanted to admit. She found Rowan in the barn that evening, working with a yearling colt that showed promise as a cutting horse. He moved with practiced ease now, his cane leaning forgotten against the fence, his hands steady and sure on the lead rope. The limp was still there, would always be there, but he'd stopped letting it define him. "We need to talk," Saren said. He looked up, reading something in her face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, at least I don't think so. I'm just—" She took a breath. "I'm pregnant." The lead rope went slack in his hands. The colt, sensing the change, trotted to the far side of the corral. Rowan just stared at her, his expression cycling through shock, fear, and something that might have been joy. "You're sure?" "Doc confirmed it this morning. About 2 months along, he thinks." Rowan walked over to her slowly, his movements careful. When he reached her, he put his hands on her shoulders, studying her face. "How do you feel about it?" "Terrified, happy, completely overwhelmed, all of it at once." "Yeah, that's about where I'm at too." He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "A baby. We're going to have a baby. Are you okay with this?" "Okay with it? Saren, I'm—" His voice cracked. "I never thought I'd have this. A family. A child. After the accident, I figured that part of life was over for me, that nobody would want that with someone like me. But you—" He had to stop, emotion choking his words. "You're going to be a good father," Saren said. "I know you are. I'm scared I'll mess it up, that my limitations will hurt them somehow. Your limitations won't hurt anyone. They're just part of who you are, and who you are is someone worth learning from." She put her hand over his heart. "This child is going to see their father work harder than anyone else, push through pain that would break other people, build something meaningful out of nothing. That's not a limitation. That's strength." He kissed her then, deep and grateful and full of promise. When they pulled apart, his eyes were wet, but his smile was real. "We should tell your mother," he said. "She already knows. Mothers always know." They told the ranch hands the next day, and the celebration lasted well into the night. Tom broke out his fiddle, someone produced a jug of whiskey, and they danced in the barn under lantern light. Saren watched Rowan laugh with the men who'd once pitied him, saw the genuine affection and respect between them, and felt something settle deep in her chest. This was family. Not blood, but chosen. The kind of family built through shared work and mutual respect and weathering storms together. Eleanor arrived a week later with a cradle that had been in the Vance family for 3 generations. She set it up in the master bedroom without asking, then stood back to admire her work. This cradle held Rowan and his father before him. Now it'll hold your child. She looked at Saren.
When I made that deal with you 3 years ago, I thought I was saving my nephew's life. I had no idea I was actually giving him a future, giving us all a future. You took a chance on a desperate girl with nothing to offer. No, I saw strength in you, the kind that doesn't break under pressure. I knew if anyone could stand beside Rowan without running or collapsing, it would be you. But I didn't expect you to do more than survive it. I didn't expect you to build this. Eleanor gestured around the room, but Saren knew she meant more than just the house. You've created something real here, something that will last long after we're all gone. The pregnancy progressed through autumn and into winter. Saren kept working as long as she could, only stopping when Rowan and Tom ganged up on her and literally removed her from the barn. She chafed at the forced rest, uncomfortable with being still, but Rowan was relentless. You spent your whole life working yourself to exhaustion, he said one evening when she complained for the 100th time. Let someone else carry the weight for once. Let me carry it. I don't know how to do that. Then learn, because you're not just taking care of yourself anymore. You're taking care of our child. And that means accepting help when you need it. So she learned. Slowly, painfully, she learned to sit still, to read, to draw, to plan for the future instead of just surviving the present. Rowan brought her the ranch accounts, and they worked on projections and budgets together from the warmth of the study. Her mother visited daily, bringing food and stories and quiet companionship. And Micah, now 13 and working with the ranch hands, would stop by after his chores to tell her about his day. You look different, he said one afternoon, softer somehow. Is that an insult? No, it's good. You used to look like you were always ready for a fight. Now you just look happy. Winter came hard that year, the snow deep and the temperatures brutal. But the ranch was prepared. They had feed stockpiled, shelter ready, systems in place. Saren watched the first big storm blow through from the safety of the house, marveling at how different it felt from that desperate winter 3 years ago. Then, the cold had been an enemy, a threat, a constant source of fear. Now it was just weather. Challenging, yes, but manageable. The baby came on a February morning, arriving early and fast, giving them barely enough time to get the doctor. The labor was hard and painful and terrifying, and there were moments when Saren thought she might not survive it. But Rowan stayed with her through all of it, holding her hand, coaching her breathing, refusing to leave even when she screamed at him to get out. When the baby finally came, red-faced and wailing and perfect, Saren held her daughter and felt something crack open in her chest. Not breaking, but opening, making room for a love so fierce and overwhelming it took her breath away. She's beautiful, Rowan said, his voice thick with emotion. She's perfect. What should we name her? They discussed names for months, cycling through family names and traditional names and names that meant strength or courage or survival. But lying there with her daughter in her arms, none of those felt right anymore. Hope, Saren said. Her name is Hope. Rowan nodded, tears streaming down his face. Hope Vance, it's perfect. The ranch rallied around the new baby. Tom carved a wooden horse. Clara knitted blankets and booties. The ranch hands took turns doing night watch so Rowan and Saren could sleep. And her mother and Micah practically moved into the house, helping with everything from cooking to laundry to walking the floor at 3 a.m. when Hope wouldn't settle. Saren had expected motherhood to be hard, but she hadn't expected it to be this hard. The sleepless nights, the constant worry, the overwhelming responsibility of keeping another human alive. There were days when she broke down crying from exhaustion and frustration. Days when she snapped at Rowan for no reason. Days when she wondered if she was failing at this the way she'd failed at everything else. But Rowan was patient. On her worst days, he'd take Hope and send Saren to bed, handling everything himself despite the pain it caused him. And when she protested, when she said she should be able to do this, he'd just shake his head. This isn't about should. It's about what we need to do to survive. You taught me that. Sometimes survival means asking for help. Sometimes it means admitting you can't do everything alone. So she let him help. Let her mother help. Let Clara and Tom and all the people who'd become family help. And slowly, she started to figure it out. Not perfectly, never perfectly, but well enough. Hope grew fast, a bright-eyed, curious baby who seemed to find joy in everything. Watching her discover the world, Saren saw things through new eyes. The way sunlight hit the mountains, the sound of horses in the corral, the smell of hay and leather and coffee in the morning.
Things she'd taken for granted or never noticed at all suddenly seemed precious and worth preserving.
When Hope was 6 months old, Sarian returned to ranch work. Not full-time and not the brutal schedule she used to keep, but enough to feel useful, to contribute. She'd strap Hope to her chest and walk the fences, checking for damage. She'd bring her to the barn while she worked with the horses, letting her daughter soak in the sounds and smells of ranch life. One afternoon, she found Rowan sitting on the porch with Hope in his lap, talking to her about the ranch like she could understand every word. "That's the North Pasture," he was saying, pointing. "In the summer, we move the cattle up there where the grass is best. And those mountains behind it, that's where your mother saved my life." Well, not literally, but close enough. Saren sat beside them. "What are you telling her?" "The truth. That her mother is the strongest person I've ever met. That she turned a desperate situation into something beautiful. That she refused to let me give up, even when I wanted to." "You're going to make her think I'm some kind of hero." "You are a hero. My hero, anyway." He looked at Hope, who was trying to grab his nose. "And someday, when she's old enough, I'm going to tell her the whole story. About how we started, and how we got here, and how love sometimes comes from the strangest places. What if she asks why we got married the first time? Then I'll tell her the truth. That I was broken, and your family was dying, and we made a deal that saved us both. And then I'll tell her that the best decisions aren't always the ones we make freely. Sometimes the best decisions are the ones we're forced into, and we just have to be brave enough to make something good out of them." Time moved differently after Hope arrived. Days blurred together in a haze of feedings and diaper changes and stolen moments of sleep. But the seasons still turned. Spring came, and the ranch burst into life again. Summer followed, hot and long, with Hope learning to crawl and then walk, her unsteady steps across the porch making everyone nervous and proud in equal measure. Saren's mother got to see her granddaughter's first birthday, a quiet celebration with cake and presents and too much laughter. She died 2 weeks later, peacefully in her sleep, her illness finally catching up with her. Saren held her daughter and stood beside the grave, feeling the weight of grief and gratitude tangled together. Her mother had gotten 3 extra years, years she never would have had without the deal Soreen made. Years where she'd been warm and fed and loved. That had to count for something. That had to be enough. "She was proud of you," Rowan said that night as they lay in bed, Hope asleep in her cradle beside them. "She told me once that you saved all of them, not just with the marriage, but before that. All those years hunting and working and refusing to give up. She said you were the reason they survived as long as they did." "I couldn't save Papa." "No, but you saved her. You saved Micah. You saved me. That's more than most people manage in a lifetime." Micah took his mother's death hard, retreating into himself for weeks. Saren worried about him, watched him go through the motions of work without any real engagement. But slowly, with time and patience and the steady rhythm of ranch life, he came back. He was different now, older somehow, but he was okay. "I'm going to make something of myself," he told Saren one evening. "Mama made me promise. She said I couldn't waste the chance you gave us. You don't owe me anything." "Yeah, I do. You traded your freedom for our lives. I'm not going to let that be for nothing." He looked out at the ranch. "Tom says I've got a gift with the horses. Says I could be a trainer if I work at it." "Then work at it. Build something worth having." He did. Over the next 2 years, Micah grew into a skilled horseman, working alongside Tom and Rowan, learning everything they could teach him. He was good, maybe even better than Rowan had been at that age. The ranch hands started calling him a natural, and buyers specifically asked to see horses he'd trained. Hope grew too, becoming a toddler full of questions and energy and fearlessness that terrified her parents daily. She followed Rowan everywhere, mimicking his limp, copying his gestures, hanging on his every word. And she adored the horses, showing the same intuitive understanding that ran in the family. "She's going to be trouble," Tom said one afternoon, watching Hope chase chickens around the yard. "She already is trouble," Saren replied. "Gets it from her father." "I heard that," Rowan called from the barn. Life settled into a rhythm, the kind built on years of partnership and shared work. The ranch continued to prosper, their reputation growing with each season. They hired more hands, expanded operations, bought adjacent land when it became available. What had started as Eleanor's ranch, then became Rowan's ranch, was now truly theirs. Built together, managed together, a legacy they were creating from scratch. Eleanor passed away in her sleep when Hope was 3 years old. She'd been slowing down for months, her sharp edges softening with age. But she'd seen the ranch thrive, seen her nephew build a real family, seen the desperate girl she'd made a deal with become a respected rancher in her own right. In her will, she left personal notes for each of them. Rowan's was short and direct, telling him she was proud, that he'd exceeded every hope she'd had for him. Saren's was longer, thanking her for saving Rowan, for building something lasting, for proving that calculated risks sometimes paid off in ways nobody could predict. They buried Eleanor on a hill overlooking the ranch she'd built and passed on. The whole territory showed up for the funeral, a testament to her influence and respect. Afterward, standing beside the grave, Rowan put his arm around Saren. "She changed everything," he said, "by bringing you here, by refusing to let me rot, by being ruthless enough to make a deal that saved us both." She was a hard woman.
She had to be. This territory doesn't reward softness. He looked at Saren. You're like her in that way. Hard when you need to be, but with more heart underneath.
The years continued to pass, each one building on the last. Hope started school, riding into town 3 times a week with Micah for lessons. She was bright and curious and stubborn, traits from both her parents that collided in spectacular ways. Saren watched her daughter grow and saw pieces of herself, pieces of Rowan, pieces of something entirely new. One evening when Hope was 7, she asked the question Saren had been dreading. "Mama, why did you and Papa get married the first time?" They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. Rowan was beside them, whittling a new toy horse for Hope's collection. Saren glanced at him, and he nodded slightly. The truth? They'd agreed long ago. Always the truth. "Because my family was starving," Saren said, "and your papa was in a lot of pain and very angry, and your great-aunt Eleanor thought maybe we could help each other." "So you didn't love each other?" "Not at first, no. We barely knew each other. But you love each other now." "Very much. But it took time. And a lot of work." Hope thought about this, her face serious. "Is it better to marry someone you love right away, or to marry someone and learn to love them?" Rowan set down his whittling. "I don't know if one is better than the other. People find each other in all kinds of ways. What matters is what you build together after. Your mama and I started in a hard place, but we chose to build something good out of it. So love is a choice?" "Partly. It's also a feeling. But feelings come and go. Choice is what lasts." "I don't understand." "You will someday." Saren pulled her close. "The point is, sometimes the best things in life come from the hardest situations. You just have to be brave enough to see the possibility in the difficulty." Hope nodded, satisfied for now. The questions would come again, Saren knew. More detailed, more probing as she got older. But they'd answer them honestly, let her understand that life was messy and complicated and rarely went according to plan. That survival sometimes meant making impossible choices. That love could grow in the strangest places if you gave it room. When Hope was 10, Rowan's pain got worse. Not dramatically, but steadily. The years of pushing through finally taking their toll. He had days where he couldn't leave bed, where every movement was agony. The doctor suggested surgery, a new procedure that might help, but the risks were significant. Paralysis, infection, death. "I don't know if it's worth it," Rowan said one night. "I've survived this long. Maybe I should just accept what I have." "What do you want?" Saren asked. "I want to ride with Hope. Really ride. Not just slow walks around the corral. I want to work a full day without collapsing. I want to dance with you at Hope's wedding someday." He looked at his hands. "But I'm scared. What if the surgery makes it worse? What if I end up completely paralyzed?" "Then we'll deal with it together, like we deal with everything." "You'd stay with me? Even if I couldn't walk at all?" "Rowan, I stayed with you when you were drunk and mean and trying to drive me away. You think I'd leave because of a surgery that didn't work? You're stuck with me. For better or worse. Remember?" He took the risk. The surgery was long and complicated, and Saren spent 12 hours in the waiting room, Hope beside her, both of them terrified and trying to hide it. When the doctor finally emerged, his face was cautiously optimistic. "It went well. Better than expected. He'll need months of recovery, but if he does the work, he should regain significant mobility. Maybe not what he had before the accident, but better than what he has now." The recovery was brutal. Weeks of bed rest followed by months of painful physical therapy. There were setbacks and infections and days when Rowan wanted to quit. But Saren was there, pushing him the same way she'd pushed him years ago, refusing to let him give up. And Hope was there too, her presence giving him something to fight for. By the time Hope turned 11, Rowan was walking better than he had in a decade. The cane was still necessary, but he needed it less. The pain was still there, but manageable. And most importantly, he could ride again. Really ride, not just carefully walk a steady horse around the corral. The first time he took Hope out on a real ride, up into the high country where the views stretched for miles, Saren watched them go with tears in her eyes. Rowan sat tall in the saddle, Hope beside him on her own horse, both of them laughing as they pushed into a gallop. This was what Hope looked like, not the absence of struggle, but the triumph of persevering through it. That evening, the three of them rode out to the ridge where Rowan had fallen 16 years ago. Hope knew the story, how her father had been broken here, how he'd spent years afraid to return, how her mother had finally helped him face it. "It doesn't look scary," Hope said, staring down at the rocks below. "It was terrifying," Rowan said. "For years this place haunted me. But your mother taught me something important. The things that break us don't have to define us. We get to choose what we become after." "Is that why you named me Hope? Because you chose to hope instead of giving up?" "Partly. But also because you represent everything we built together, everything we fought for. You're proof that survival can become something more than just not dying. You're proof that life can be beautiful, even after it's been terrible." They sat there as the sun set, three people connected by blood and choice and hard-won love. Serene looked at her husband, at her daughter, at the ranch spreading out below them, and felt a peace she'd spent most of her life not knowing was possible. This wasn't the life she'd imagined as a girl. It wasn't the life she'd expected when she made that desperate deal with Eleanor Vance 16 years ago. But it was the life she'd built piece by piece, through work and sacrifice and refusing to quit when things got hard. And it was good. Messy and imperfect and full of scars, but good. Hope grew up on the ranch, learning to ride and rope and manage cattle. She had her father's gift with horses and her mother's stubborn determination. By the time she was 16, she was running operations alongside her parents, making decisions and managing hands with a confidence that made visiting ranchers shake their heads in admiration. Micah eventually married and started his own training operation on a piece of land Saren and Rowan sold him at a fraction of its worth. He was family, and family took care of each other. His success reflected well on the Vance Ranch, and together they built a reputation that reached beyond Montana into neighboring territories. The years turned Saren's dark hair gray at the temples and added lines around Rowan's eyes. The pain never fully left him, and there were still bad days when old injuries flared and old demons whispered. But they were rarer now, and he'd learned to weather them without losing himself. Saren's own scars faded too, though they never disappeared completely. She still had moments of panic when supplies ran low, still woke occasionally from nightmares of that desperate winter. But Rowan was always there to remind her that they had enough, that they were safe, that she didn't have to carry the weight alone anymore. On their 20th anniversary, they held a celebration at the ranch. Every hand they'd ever employed showed up, along with neighboring ranchers, townspeople, and distant family. The party lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and too much food. Tom, now in his 70s but still working, pulled Saren aside at one point. "You know what I remember most about when you first got here?" "What's that?" "You were so young, and so angry, and so determined not to break." He smiled. "You reminded me of a green horse, all spirit and fight, refusing to be tamed. But you weren't mean about it. You just refused to quit." "I didn't know how to quit. That wasn't an option." "No, I suppose it wasn't. But you could have just survived it, done your time, kept your head down, gotten what you needed, and walked away. Instead, you built this." He gestured at the party, at the ranch, at everything they'd created. "You turned desperation into legacy. That's not something everyone can do." Later, as the party wound down, Saren and Rowan stood on the porch watching Hope dance with a young man from a neighboring ranch. She looked happy and young and full of possibilities. "She's going to leave eventually," Rowan said quietly. "Build her own life. Maybe take over a ranch of her own. Maybe do something completely different. I know, that's how it should be. You ready for that?" "No, but I'll survive it. We both will." He pulled her close, and they stood there watching their daughter, feeling the weight of years and love and survival pressing down on them in the best possible way. "We did good," Rowan said, "considering how we started. We did real good. We're not done yet. No, not yet. Still plenty of time to mess it all up." She laughed, and he kissed her, and they went inside to their home, their life, their hard-won happiness. The ranch passed to Hope when Serene and Rowan were ready to step back, though they never fully retired. They stayed involved, offering advice and help, but letting their daughter make her own decisions, her own mistakes, her own successes. Watching her navigate the challenges of ranch management, seeing her handle difficult situations with wisdom beyond her years, Saren finally understood what her own mother must have felt watching her survive: pride, and grief for the innocence that survival always costs, and hope that the next generation would do even better than the last. On quiet evenings, Saren and Rowan would ride up to the ridge together, the place where everything had almost ended and instead became a beginning. They'd sit on the rocks watching the sunset, not talking much, just being together. Rowan's limp was more pronounced now, and Saren's joints ached from decades of hard work. They were old, marked by time and life and all the battles they'd survived, but they were together, and that was what mattered. "You ever regret it?" Rowan asked one evening. "The deal, trading your freedom for your family's survival." Saren thought about it. "I regret how desperate I was. I regret that the world was cruel enough to force that choice, but I don't regret you. I don't regret this life. Even the hard parts? Especially the hard parts. The hard parts made us who we are." She looked at him. "We weren't good people when we started. We were just desperate and broken and barely surviving. But we became good people. We built something good. That's worth every hard day." He nodded, understanding. They'd learned that lesson together over years of struggle and effort. That strength wasn't about never breaking. It was about breaking and choosing to rebuild anyway. That love wasn't about perfection. It was about seeing someone's damage and deciding to stay beside them while they healed. That survival alone was just existing. But survival with purpose, survival with partnership, survival that transformed into meaningful living. That was what made life worth the struggle. They'd started as strangers forced together by circumstances beyond their control. Two people drowning in their own pain, grabbing hold of each other, not from love, but from desperation. They could have stayed that way. Two broken people existing in parallel, taking what they needed and giving nothing back. Instead, they'd chosen differently. They'd fought and pushed and challenged each other until something new emerged. They'd built a partnership, then a friendship, then a love that ran deeper than romance or passion. They'd created a family, a legacy, a life that mattered. And in the end, that was the only thing that really counted. Not how you started, but what you built from the ruins. Not whether you fell, but whether you got back up. Not whether life was kind, but whether you were brave enough to make something kind from whatever life gave you. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Saren took Rowan's hand and held it tight. Two old warriors who'd survived winter and loss and pain and fear. Two people who'd learned that the opposite of giving up wasn't success. It was just refusing to quit. That sometimes the best thing you could do was survive one more day, and then another, until survival transformed into something that actually resembled living. They rode home together in the gathering darkness, back to the ranch they'd built, and the life they'd earned. And if their bodies ached, and their scars still hurt sometimes, well, those were just proof that they'd lived through something hard and come out the other side. Together. Always together. That was worth everything.